Hello? Hello?
Hello, Professor Moyo. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Good, welcome. And hello, Alice. Alice Mongwe, are you there?
Yes, I am. I just hadn't turned on my sound, sorry.
Hello, Tiseke.
Hi, yes, I'm here. Violet, I believe you're muted. Oh.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, nice to see you. Well, hope we'll be able to see you in video format. We can hear you quite clearly this side.
Thanks.
We'll be starting shortly.
I'll turn it on soon. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay. And is Namatai in?
Yeah. I've just admitted you in the meeting now.
Okay, great. Hi, Namatai. Just want to make sure that her audio is okay. Namatai?
Hello.
Hi, Namatai. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Sorry, I had initially logged in with the wrong account, so I had to just the one that was written in division set masters.
No,
now I'm now Namatai. Yeah.
That's okay.
Hello? Can they hear me, I wonder? Violet? Can't hear.
Hello?
I don't know whether they can hear me, but anyway, you'll be able to watch.
Yeah.
I can't hear anybody else though. So I think.
Hi, Violet, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Blessing, can you mute everyone else so that we can start, please?
All right, that's fine.
And we can start.
Yes, everyone is muted now. Hi, Violet.
Yes. Okay, yeah, we can start.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. Welcome to this Zimbabwe Dialogue Series. organized by the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition. The Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition is an organization, it's a network of civil society organizations that was formed in 2001 with a specific goal and a vision of seeing a democratic Zimbabwe. Today, we are going to be holding our first meeting, our first virtual discussion of a series called Zimabwe Dialogue Series, which is going to go on until the next 12 and 24 months. The purpose of this discussion is for us to interrogate the crisis that is bedeviling our country and try to find solutions to the crisis. What is it that is affecting us? What are the solutions? What is it that we can do so that we achieve a democratic country? As you know that things are not well in Zim right now. The political situation is very tense. Activists are being arrested, activists are being jailed, activists are being abducted. And we have comrades that are in exile, that have ran away from the security situation in Zimbabwe. In fact, the democratic space continues to shrink as I'm speaking. So today we have a panel of very, very eloquent speakers, and they are going to give us their thoughts with regards to what is the crisis and what do we have to do so that we achieve it. They are drawn from different areas of expertise, and we hope that today's discussion is going to be part of the discussions that we will be doing, and that also feeds in to the other discussions that are going on as we try to find a lasting solution to the crisis that is bedeviling our country. So without wasting much of your time, I'll hand over the reins to Violet Gonda, who is going to be the moderator of today's session. Over to you, Violet.
Thanks, Blessing, Bava. Welcome to the launch of the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition Zimbabwe Dialogue Series, and I'm Violet Gonda, the moderator. The Zimbabwe crisis is not new. We continue to see human rights abuses, arrests, and abductions, including election disputes. And these issues have also been discussed at continental and international level, but we still don't have a solution to these problems. The Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition, as you heard from Blessing, is launching this Zimbabwe Dialogue Series, which will be a platform that will draw lessons learned from the past and chart a way forward. We hope that this platform is going to be more solutions oriented. Today's discussion will be looking at Zimbabwe's prospects, crisis, transition, imperatives, and stability. And of course, throughout the program, we'll do our best and time permitting to take comments and questions from the virtual floor via this Zoom platform, and also read out some contributions from the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition Facebook page. And as Blessing said, we have an impressive lineup of speakers. Our keynote speaker is academic and former Minister of Higher Education, Professor Jonathan Moyo. And he'll be followed by our respondents who will fill in the gaps and try to give us a critique of where Zimbabwe is and what various stakeholders should be doing. The speakers are youth activist and We Lead founder, Namatai Kwekweza, Alice Mongwe, the director of the Dishwanelo, the Botswana Center for Human Rights, and Chief of Party Advancing Rights in Southern Africa program at Freedom House at Tiseke, Kasambala. Welcome, everyone. Now, I know that some of you are muted right now, so I will go straight into it, and let's hear from Professor Jonathan Moyo, who will give us a presentation on scenarios and options, and then I'll be able to also ask some questions after his presentations and bring in the respondents. Professor Jonathan Moyo.
Thank you, Violet. And thank you to the Crisis Coalition for this opportunity. I was just getting myself ready. I don't know why your volume was very low. I hope mine is not that low. I was having some difficulties hearing you.
No, we can hear you.
Okay. Let me just, yeah, can I get that? I'm just trying to get I would like to share my presentation so that at least this part of it, you and the rest of the panelists are able to follow. So if you bear with me just a second, because I want you to be able to see it.
Okay. So while Professor Moyo is preparing to share his presentation, I just also wanted to say we were expecting Elinor Sisulu from South Africa and Venitia Govendor, but they're having technical issues. I think there are power problems in South Africa right now, and Mr. Arnold Sunga will also not be able to join us. But the two ladies said as soon as their electricity issues are sorted, they might be able to join us. Okay, Professor Moyo, it's all yours.
Yes. Are you able to see my Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
You can.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Violet. As I indicated, also thank you to Crisis Coalition for this opportunity to discuss what is not only a pertinent issue or topic, but one of major concern to Zimbabweans as to the crisis in our country and what to do about it. As we are aware, every crisis that happens anywhere is best discussed with reference to those who are affected directly by the crisis, and in particular, those who are quarreling. In our case, one of the problems in the public discourse on the crisis in Zimbabwe has been that people tend to be too abstract, too general, and afraid of talking about the players, the protagonists, the people who are quarreling, to name them and describe why they are quarreling, what is it that they are quarreling over. In the case of Zimbabwe, we need to focus on the contesting centers of power. And my presentation in that regard will focus on key individuals and key institutions that are quarreling, leading to the crisis in our country. The first one being Emmerson Mnangagwa, the next being retired General Constantine Chiwenga, the third being General Sibusiso Moyo, the fourth being General Philip Valerio Svanda, the commander of ZDF, next being General Edzai Chimonyo, who is the commander of ZNA, then the junior soldiers in the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, and on the other hand, Advocate Nelson Chamisa and the people in their generality, but specifically as voters, the electorate. These are the key individuals in the crisis in our country, or whose quarrels have led to a crisis in our country. On the other hand, we have key institutions which should be our focus, and these are the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, ZDF, the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU-PF, and the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance, the MDCA. Now, in the presentation, I will also identify key interested parties. These are not the same as the first group, which is a group of stockholders, if you will, but key interested parties who are stakeholders, who need to be taken into account in terms of what they've been doing to define the crisis in our country. And these are Kuda, Tagire, or Sakunda, but in particular, since we're talking about individuals, Tagire, and then the Zimbabweans who are in the diaspora, the Zimbabwe diaspora, and of course, South Africa, the Southern African Development Community, SADC, the African Union, or AU. These are the key players that we should always keep our focus on, because they are the quarreling parties, they are the relevant parties. There is a tendency to treat the crisis in Zimbabwe as a free-for-all involving everyone. If we have these individuals in mind, there's a background to it. Why are they quarreling? What is the background? We will recall that after the eventful events of November 15, 2017, a few weeks or about a month or so later, on the 17th of December 2017, the newly appointed commander of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, General P.V. Sibanda, declared that the Operation Restore Legacy campaign had come to an end, and that they had succeeded in their objective to remove the criminal elements that they said had surrounded the former president and causing anxiety and despondency among the people of Zimbabwe. So the operation, the military operation, was supposed to end on the 17th of December 2017. But as we all know, instead of going back to the barracks, the ZDF went to Munumtapa building, at least some elements of them, to become cabinet ministers. Others went to ZANU-PF's Sheikh building to become Politburo members. Many more became embedded in various very critical capacities in the public service, in the judiciary, and in Chapter 12 institutions like ZEC, as well as in local government structures. Basically, ZDF took over the oversight of police and intelligence functions, as shown by the fact that soldiers now control roadblocks, all checkpoints in the country, including law and order operations in residential areas as well as villages. Then that is what led to the crisis in Zimbabwe. And this is what we should be focusing on, because against the background of these events of 2017, the Constitution of Zimbabwe was suspended and an undeclared state of emergency came into effect, such that by March 20 this year, ZDF took advantage to deepen and broaden its takeover that started in November 2017 to basically effect and consolidate the state of emergency, the de facto state of emergency. The consequence of that development is that the Constitution has been frozen in general, but in particular, the Bill of Rights in Zimbabwe has been suspended. And while the effect of the suspension of the Bill of Rights under an undeclared state of emergency has affected all the rights of Zimbabweans, especially those rights relating to life and liberty, it is notable that the specific right that has been targeted by these developments is the right to vote, is the fundamental right for Zimbabweans to choose their government and consent to it. And this has been done in two ways. One, using the Supreme Court, rather ZEF, the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, using the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission and the Constitutional Court stole the presidential election in 2018. Secondly, using the Supreme Court and Parliament in 2020, the parliamentary votes of the MDCA were stolen. And so we, in effect, in consequence, have a background where the presidential election was stolen in 2018 and the parliamentary votes of the MDCA were stolen in 2020. And the effect of that theft has been to upset key fundamental provisions of the Constitution, in particular, Section 3, subsection 2F of the Constitution, which requires the respect for the people of Zimbabwe from whom the authority to govern is derived, and Section 88 of the Constitution, which requires or provides that the executive authority derives from the people of Zimbabwe, and Section 117 of subsection 1 of the Constitution, which stipulates that legislative authority of Zimbabwe is derived from the people. And finally, Section 162, which provides that the judiciary authority derives from the people of Zimbabwe. The effect of subverting this authority has been to effectively give control of the executive, legislative, and executive authority to the Zimbabwe Defense Forces. This means that Zimbabwe is now a de facto military state. In other words, in Zimbabwe, state institutions and public agencies have become militarized. This situation is what in fact defines the crisis in Zimbabwe today, that everything that is going on, or if you will, everything that has in fact gone wrong is a footnote to the de facto suspension of the Constitution and militarization of the state. So, who has been affected by this? I've already indicated who the key parties are who define this crisis. And these are the parties we need to focus on. One, Mnangagwa controls the military through General Thomas Moyo, who is the commander of the military intelligence department and who works very closely with the Director General of the CIO, Isaac Moyo, and to a lesser extent with Owen Mutangube, who is the Minister of State for National Security. The police, unlike before the coup, have also come into the loop through the Commissioner General of Police, Matanga, but to a larger extent, his deputy, Mutamba. And Mnangagwa also controls Forex in the country through Kudata Gwirei, who works very closely with Manguja and the Minister of Finance, Mtuli. The commander of the military intelligence has, for the first time in Zimbabwe, moved military control of that key arm from the ZDF to State House, and he now reports directly to Mnangagwa. This is the first center of power that is contributing to the definition of the crisis in Zimbabwe. The second is General Chiwenga, who has quite some considerable influence on ZNA, the Zimbabwe National Army, through General Moyo, who commands ZNA and who came into the force after 10 years of absence as an ambassador. And Chiwenga, a long spell in 2019 outside the country on health grounds, weakened his base, not only within ZDF, but also within ZANU-PF, and concerns over his health contributed to prospects of weakened expectations about prospects of his leadership. And increasingly, while he was seen as a contender to Mnangagwa, he now has slowly become a weaker contender as a king and a stronger voice as a kingmaker. But quite a number of politicians, key politicians in the ZANU-PF Politburo still have expectations around him, and this is the background against which the likes of Tendai Savanu and Cleveria Chizema were expelled from the party, but he is also linked to others who are quite influential in the ZANU-PF party, namely the likes of Obed Mpofu, Patrick Chinamasa, and to in a less extent in the lower ranks, the expelled Godfrey Tenengam, Jimmy Kunaka, and others who are among those that the police are looking for in connection with the 31st July protest. But more interestingly, and a very important but undiscussed center of power that is contending and contributing to the crisis that is playing out in the country is General S.B. Moyo. While less has been said about him, there are growing whispers, which are in fact getting louder, that SB is the most serious contender of power with his own ambitions, and one who has been fancying his chances, and who, to some considerable extent, was very influential in determining the 2018 presidential election through his connection with AFRICOM, which was the arm that was deployed to steal the presidential election in 2018. But General S.B. Moyo has had quite a significant role in the army as the de facto prime minister of the army. And his influence, although connected with the army's involvement in the DRC, he was the army's point of entry or connection with civilian authority. And he has used this background to emerge as a critical voice or contender or center of power. Then there's General Sibanda, who by virtue of being the commander of the defense forces is a center of power, but one with little influence in the politics of the country because of his background as ex-ZIPRA with legal connections in ZANU-PF. But a significant center of power because he served for a long time as the commander of the ZNA. And we have the junior soldiers who have a completely different view from the generals and have been giving General Chimonyo quite a hard time and made it difficult for him to assert his authority, and whose views are increasingly getting aligned with the public. And next, we have Nelson Chamisa and the MDC Alliance. Nelson Chamisa, because he won the presidential election in 2018, and there's very strong evidence to support that, even though this has not been unpacked in the public to the extent the situation would require. And his MDC Alliance, which won the seats in parliament that have been targeted in recent months since March by Mnangagwa and the elements that he has been working with. So on the one hand, you have the institutional players in the state, and on the other, you have the opposition player and the opposition party. And lastly, the people themselves, but not in their generality, but the people as the electorate, as voters. Now, out of this background, there are 7 contending scenarios that are defining the crisis in Zimbabwe and suggesting the possible solutions. You, of course, have Mnangagwa, who wants the status quo based on the stolen presidential election and stolen parliamentary seats. And the challenge for him is that his claim both to the presidency and to the MDCA parliamentary seats is illegitimate. And that means the sort of scenario that emerges from Mnangagwa's status quo is necessarily a vicious authoritarian order. He has to be authoritarian by definition, given the background of his claim to authority. Then you have the scenario linked to Chiwenga. Chiwenga's people want to see a GNU based on an elite pact between the anti-Mnangagwa ZANU-PF elements and some MDCA elements, and his arrangement largely mirrors the 2009 and to 2013 GNU. And this scenario would require a constitutional arrangement, and there are no guarantees that this would be possible. The SB Moyo scenario is the most active. Most of what has happened in the country, including developments around the 31st July, have some direct connection with the SBA Moyo scenario. It is being presented as an NTA. It is based on a mixture of interests that have legal or no strong political roots in either ZANU-PF or the MDCA. It is some kind of a GNU, but it is disguised as an NTA to make it appear acceptable. Then you have the possibility of a military transition led by disgruntled junior officers. This is increasingly becoming a likelihood in Zimbabwe. There's a clear disjuncture between the generals and the junior officers. And the junior officers are, their program, their views are much more aligned with the public sentiment. And there is then the 5th one, which is the likelihood of a spontaneous revolution, the most dangerous one, with a very high risk of violence. And this one is linked to the general grievances that are across the population, but it remains amorphous. There's no clear leadership except that the evidence of disgruntlement within the armed forces is palpable. Lastly, the scenario of a restoration of constitutionalism, and this is based on the recognition of the correct result of the presidential election, the 2018 presidential election, that it was won by Nelson Chamisa. And this is very important because it is fundamental to keep in mind that any transition any democratic transition must be guided by the principle of consent of the governed, the popular consent. And while there has been talk about the 2018 presidential election, the discussion and the focus on that election has not been adequate. And it is surprising that the political players have shied away from confronting the fact that indeed Nelson Chamisa won the election, and that there is this evidence of the victory outside what ZEC and the Concord have put in the public domain. Then, of course, the need to respect the 2018 parliamentary election result, that the MDC won the MPA or seats that have been the subject of the recall. This was established beyond the contestation at the time and before the electoral court, and that it has taken manipulation through the Supreme Court and through Parliament to alter the result. And the third fact that against this background, which has led to the militarization of the state, there is a need to demilitarize state institutions and public agencies. And the last scenario is taking into account these 6. A case exists for a negotiated transitional settlement. Now, the question is, who should be the affected parties in this negotiation? There is now a tendency to say it should be a free-for-all. The background of what has actually happened, if you look at who the affected players are, is that the negotiations should be between the MDCA alliance and the Zimbabwe Defense Forces and ZANU-PF. And that negotiated settlement would require mediation. Now, the fact that Zimbabwe has become a de facto military state, whose implication has been the de facto suspension of the constitution, means that there is no national person or entity in Zimbabwe that can mediate the restoration of constitutionalism and the demilitarization of the state in the country. That's number one. Number two, the fact that South Africa, SADC, and the African Union embraced the November 2017 military coup in Zimbabwe means that they are part of the problem and that are interested parties who cannot broker as neutrals the demilitarization of the state and the restoration of constitutionalism in the country. And lastly, because of these two facts, the only mediation or facilitation of the resolution of the crisis in Zimbabwe that has a real possibility of a sustainable success would be under the United Nations, which has the capacity and international experience to facilitate the restoration of constitutionalism and the supervision of the military to return to the barracks through the demilitarization of the state and institutions, public institutions. And this is where we are. The situation really in Zimbabwe, finally, to conclude, is that perhaps the best way of capturing it is to recall an incident that in the Politburo, a ZANU-PF Politburo, involving the late commander of the ZDF, General Mujuru. There was a very heated meeting where the so-called Lacoste people led by Mnangagwa were accusing him of working with whites to mine and exploit diamonds in Zimbabwe. And that is controlled by whites. And after the heated debate, Mjuru raised his hand and sought Mugabe's attention. And when he was recognized, he said, President, asina murungu wake panapa ndiani. That was then. The question was, asina murungu wake ndiani. Post 2017, the parallel to that very fundamental question, if Mjuru was alive, he would say, President, asina general wake ndiani. The question now in Zimbabwe is that it is impossible to resolve the crisis without demilitarizing the state and its public institutions and agencies. And no one in Zimbabwe can do it with his or her own general without risking serious violence. And this requires external mediation, and the external mediation cannot be provided by South Africa through envoys because South Africa is an interested party. It cannot be done by SADC because SADC is an interested party. It cannot be done by the African Union. They are an interested party. They supported the military coup in November 2017. It is a multilateral issue that requires the intervention of the United Nations, and there is a debate already going on as to who could be the United Nations mediator or facilitator, and some in Zimbabwe have suggested that perhaps Kagame could be such a person, but the critical reason why we now need the mediation of the United Nations is that they have the capacity and experience to demilitarize the state, and that is the urgent need in Zimbabwe today. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Moyo, for this enlightening presentation. And I just have a couple of questions to ask you before I ask the other speakers to come in and give us their thoughts on what's been said and what they also think is the way forward. On the issue of the military, you know, you have laid it out quite clearly that the elephant in the room is the military. But still, when people say the military should return to the barracks, and they have not done that, and it just didn't start after the 2013 elections or when we had the coup. This started a long time ago in many elections in previous years. So can we actually solve the crisis without the involvement of the army? And how do you do that?
Well, the fact of the matter is that the army is the problem. Now, that if you want, the army is the military. The army is the elephant in the room. So no, you cannot solve the crisis in Zimbabwe without the army. They are the problem, but there is no need to negotiate with the army in terms of extending to them a political role. And yes, it is true that the issue is not new. The problem of security sector reform has been with Zimbabwe for a long time. In fact, it was one of the critical issues during the constitution making process. But the 2013 constitution provided a solution to the security sector reform question. And the fact that the army overturned the constitution within 3 or 2 years of the new constitution demonstrates the seriousness of the issue. we have to understand that the army should not be begged to return to the barracks. It is a constitutional requirement. They are being involved in public institutions, public agencies, and being in the streets, superintending over roadblocks, police checkpoints, and so forth, is unconstitutional. It's not a matter for negotiation. It is unconstitutional. But because they've gotten to this position through a military coup, it means there has to be engagement with them, facilitated by an institution which has the capacity and experience and legitimacy to undertake that task. There is no such institution in the country, no such personality in the country. South Africa cannot do it. SADC cannot do it. The African Union cannot do it. But the United Nations can do it. It has the experience. And that's why this is necessary. This issue that the Army's role since 2017 is not new, or the claim that this is not new, is not factual. This is new. It's unprecedented that you have the Army taking over roadblocks, checkpoints, public institutions, the judiciary, Chapter 12 institutions, directing them in the manner that it has been doing since November 2017. It's unprecedented. That is what constitutes the crisis in Zimbabwe. It is a militarization of the state. It is a de facto military state, which is new, which must be dealt with. And yes, the army will have generals who are concerned about security issues, amnesty issues, and hence the need to have the UN as the most appropriate mediating institution.
But on that issue of the UN, before I move on to Namatai to hear her thoughts on this, ZANU-PF has said that there's no crisis in Zimbabwe. And so what would bring in the UN into this to intervene, because Zimbabwe is not a country at war. So under what conditions do the UN go to countries in turmoil?
Well, in the first place, we have to accept that the flare-up that is in Zimbabwe, everyone now accepts that there is a crisis in Zimbabwe. And ZANU-PF accepts that not through admission, verbal admission that there is a crisis, but through its actions. The last two Politburo meetings in ZANU-PF have confirmed that there is a crisis. The extraordinary measures of expelling two members and alleging that these two members are linked to the protest that had been planned for the 31st of July, and the arrest and detention, jailing without bail of journalists and activists, and linking them to the action that had been planned for the 31st of July. And in particular, the rulings by the magistrates in the denial of bail, openly asserting that this is because the threat to the overthrow of ZANU-PF, or the ZANU-PF must go threat, is still alive and real. Does demonstrate to everyone that there is a crisis in Zimbabwe. We don't have to get ZANU-PF to admit. The fact that President Ramaphosa sent 3 envoys only 3 weeks ago is clear evidence that there's a crisis in Zimbabwe. And the involvement of the United Nations is because the crisis involves powers of or centers of power that are from the military. General Chiwenga is from the military. Mnangagwa is working with General Thomas Moyo, who is controlling the military intelligence department, and working with the CIO and police elements. They've formed a ferret force which is abducting and torturing citizens, and therefore is a security threat. It's a military action. And SB Moyo, around whom a number of forces are now galvanizing and asserting their interest, is a military force. The major power centers in Zimbabwe today are of a security nature. And when there is that situation, it is not only a threat to the national order, it's a threat to regional stability and security, and therefore a typical and good candidate for UN intervention.
Okay, so Namatai was going to come in next, but she's just having a connection problem. So Tiseke will be coming in. So can you unmute Tiseke while we're preparing for that? I just I'll take read one of the contributions from the Zoom chats from Rufus Mawure, who says, well presented, Professor Moyo. However, you deliberately left the battle between Lacoste and G40 factions within ZANU-PF. That's the one battle that started everything towards November 2017. G40 underestimated Lacoste support from the army and security sector. If G40 had behaved well politically, will November 2017 have happened? Professor Moyo.
Thank you for that question, Violet. I think that what people conveniently overlook is that the 2017 military coup did not happen out of the so-called G40 Lacoste battle. The coup was a direct outcome of the 2018 poll coup. The pact between Mnangagwa and Chiwenga was made in 2008. And one of the strategic mistakes, I would say, that President Mugabe made in 2009 during the GNU was to appoint Mnangagwa Minister of Defense. During the period 2009 to 2013, Mnangagwa and Chiwenga made the pact that led to the coup. It had nothing to do with the G40. All the events that happened, including what happened to Joyce Mjuru, was a build-up to the coup. The 2013 election was, for all intents and purposes, run by Mnangagwa and Chiwenga. It was a military-run election. Society needed to respond to that. Specifically, as far as the so-called G40 issue is concerned, the public record will show that some of us alerted the country, not just ZANU-PF, not just the government, but the country. And the country reacted by seeing us as a so-called faction, and therefore decided to choose between factions. The mistake, I think, yes, perhaps G40 people, so-called, could have done certain things differently, but society took a position, which is why there was jubilation in November 2017. The military coup or action was embraced by society. There is no way that coup would have succeeded without it enjoying popular support. South Africa, SADC, and the African Union supported the military coup on the back of the popular support which was visible, including, we must say, popular support from the major opposition party, which became part of the coup, in the expectation that immediately thereafter there would be an inclusive government or some kind of a GNU.
All right. No, thank you very much for that, Prof. We'll come back to you because there are so many questions that are coming even via WhatsApp, with some people saying Professor Moyo has no idea of international relations. The United Nations won't go in unless the AU is asked, and there's so many other contributions that are coming. But let me go to Tiseke Kasambala. Tiseke, first of all, your thoughts on what has been said, and what do you think, what can be the role of external players in this crisis in Zimbabwe?
Thank you very much, Violet, and thanks to the Zimbabwe Crisis Coalition for inviting me to be a discussant. I listened with great interest to Professor Jonathan Moyo's presentation, which was really, really comprehensive and set out the protagonists in the Zimbabwe crisis and provided an almost power analysis of what's going on in the country. And I think I should take it from the last question that you made, Violet, related to the United Nations as a key actor in all this. And I think we should say from the onset that Article 2 of the United Nations on Charter is pretty clear on situations when the United Nations can intervene. And for the most part, speaks to non-intervention in domestic affairs. So the issue of the situation in Zimbabwe under the Charter is not necessarily within the jurisdiction in terms of that kind of intervention of the UN, I would argue. I would argue that, of course, there are certain circumstances when the UN does step in, and we need to be clear about what those circumstances are. You, Violet, mentioned one, which is in the situation of outright conflict. And we have not yet seen that in Zimbabwe. But I think a big issue that we need to announce on, and Professor Moyo actually spoke to it, is the acknowledgement, the explicit acknowledgement that there is a political crisis, there's a crisis in Zimbabwe. And what we have seen across the board by many external actors, although Professor Moyo argues rightly that it is clear that there's a crisis and even ZANU-PF knows it, but there has been very little explicit acknowledgement of that crisis, as protracted as it has been. And I think this is fundamental because it sets out how the various external actors can intervene in the Zimbabwe situation. We have spoken about our frustrations with the Southern Africa Development Community and their interests, and the equal frustrations that a lot of people have, Zimbabweans have, about the African Union as actors that are not operating within the interests of the Zimbabwean citizenry. I acknowledge and I accept that. But at the same time, I believe that beyond Zimbabweans themselves, the crisis in Zimbabwe has to be settled at a regional level. And in as much as it pains me, given the abject failure of SADC to address the crisis in Zimbabwe, one has to say that those expectations and those the pressure needs to be maintained on SADC action. And it is interesting to note that the African National Congress, the NEC member Lindiwe Zulu, who is also chair of international relations, acknowledged that there was a crisis in Zimbabwe. We also saw the ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule speak out about what was going on in Zimbabwe and express concern. Of course, there's more that needs to be done, but that is a good starting point because in many ways, it takes away from ZANU-PF's belief that there is tacit support for its actions from other liberation movements. So that's the first thing I wanted to really kind of emphasize. When we look at how the African Union should play a role, I think it's important for us to place pressure on the African Union to no longer simply delegate responsibility for addressing the crisis in Zimbabwe onto SADC, but to look at the options that we've spoken about in terms of mediation, but focusing on a high-level Pan-African panel of mediators. I myself have serious concerns about Paul Kagame from a human rights perspective and as a human rights activist, about Paul Kagame being one of those mediators. But nonetheless, I acknowledge the need for a high-level Pan-African panel of mediators. And what I can say is that that responsibility and what those mediators should be given is a mandate to bring the ruling party and the opposition to the table to discuss ways out of this protracted crisis and look at a clear economic and political reform process. The final issue I really wanted to focus on in listening to this discussion, and I am glad that the professor acknowledged that the Zimbabwean citizenry is a key protagonist in this as well, beyond all the other political actors, is the issue of solidarity and support for the crisis in Zimbabwe and in addressing the crisis in Zimbabwe. And I would really like to anchor this discussion in the regional dynamics that we are seeing, which have been really brought to the starkly brought to the forefront by the COVID-19 pandemic, where across the region, citizens are expressing their frustration with autocratic, corrupt leadership on our continent and in the region. And for me, Zimbabwe is almost a lightning rod where people see the commonalities in the frustrations around corrupt leadership, autocratic rule. In as much as Zimbabwe is unique when it comes to the militarization of that state, the other issues are common to all. And so when we look at solutions, we should be looking at how we can continue to tap in to the frustrations of the citizenry across the region with events that are taking place and with leadership. And it's been heartening to see the online support and the initial online solidarity that started off in South Africa and spread across the board in the aftermath of the arrests of Hopo Chinono and the other activists and political leaders. The question is how we can maintain that kind of online or cyber activism beyond the very short social media cycles that we see. More recently, in fact, I think it was yesterday, we saw a great statement coming out from NGOs and individuals across the region and beyond, speaking out about the judicial interference in the case of Beatrice Mtetwa, who is representing Hopo Chinono, and their attempts to prevent her from doing so. And I think, again, that is something that we need to tap into, that sort of regional support, the continuation of those statements. We are looking at a diversity of institutions, of individuals, of the citizenry, and that kind of collective action should not be underestimated. And I know I've spoken for a while, but finally, let me just say that we should speak about Zimbabwean activists themselves. I think we cannot underestimate what they have been going through during this crisis, in the decades of this crisis, without or with little respite. And they need our support regionally. But I also want to urge Zimbabwean civil society and Zimbabwean activists to tap into the Zimbabwean citizenry, because you cannot underestimate the frustrations of the citizenry, and to work as a collective. We have seen the Catholic Church speaking out in Zimbabwe. Let's bring those diverse voices together in country to put pressure on this regime. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tiseke. And also on the issue of the military, what are your thoughts on that, especially where civil society is concerned? What should be the civil societies, on the role of the military? What can they do in this regard?
Well, in my opinion, I think it has always been clear from a human rights perspective that the military does not have a role in domestic issues. In Zimbabwe, need to return to the barracks. And my view, and from what I can see as someone working on the outside, is that civil society in Zimbabwe is of the same view. But it certainly makes for a more complex situation in terms of activism. I can give you the example of Malawi, where we saw a shorter crisis, but a relatively intense crisis post Malawi's elections in 2019. But the crucial thing there was the lack of involvement of the military and the neutrality of the military in the political crisis in Malawi, which allowed civil society and Malawian citizens to demand their democratic rights in a manner that gave them the space to do so, which we have not seen in Zimbabwe because of this militarization and securitization of the state and the reactions and the brutal reactions of these institutions to civic activism.
Okay, thanks, Tiseke. We'll come back to you again in a bit. Let me go to Namatai Kwekweza, who's the founder of We Lead. Namatai, what do you think is the problem in Zimbabwe right now, and what role can the youth play in solving the crisis in the country? Can we unmute Namatai, please?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So
Namatai, unmute yourself. Namatai. Okay, Namatai has been having connection problems, so we'll try and get her again later. But let me bring in Alice Mongwe from Dishwanelo in Botswana. Alice, your thoughts on what Professor Moyo had to submit, and also what can we expect from the international community, especially, SADC, the AU, and also Botswana now that President Masisi is now the chair of the Troika.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers of this. I feel as if I'm at a little bit of a...
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can, Alice. You can go ahead.
It's clear now. Thank you very much. Speaking as somebody from the region, from a very small country, we only have just over 2 million people in our country. And really, as an individual person who's felt really passionately about human rights and trying to contribute in some way through working with other organizations as well as with ours, I've listened with great interest to what Professor Moyo has said. And I found it extremely helpful for context setting. I tend to veer in the direction of Tiseke, far more than veering in the direction of Prof putting a lot of faith in the UN. I had a question for him in terms of asking whether there are any vested interests which he foresees within the UN space, which may impede effective mediation or involvement of the UN. I say this because in the short history of Botswana, in 1977, when our foreign minister went to the UN to report the incursions by the Rhodesian forces into Botswana, the Security Council passed a resolution in 1977 in terms of focusing on the issue, looking at the threat to security and influx of refugees, but Britain and the USA abstained. Why? Because such resolution will prejudice an early settlement to what they call the Rhodesian problem. So putting faith, all one's faith, in a body which is not linked to your regional context can present some challenges. Having said that, I don't think the UN is completely irrelevant, but as Tiseke says, I think it's important to really try and focus energy within our region and then move further afield. In terms of Botswana itself, mentioned quite correctly that Botswana is now chair of the SADC organ on politics, defense and security in the person of our president. There's often a lot of hope placed on Botswana, but as I started off by saying, we are a small country, and being landlocked, we've had to develop a foreign policy which has often been described as being cautious, using cautious diplomacy. Having been next door to apartheid South Africa and having managed to survive that, having been next door to Rhodesia and having managed to survive that, not without injury and death, it has really called upon the use of extreme diplomacy for our country to have survived. The approach which it followed has been one of non-interference in the internal affairs of neighbors, on the one hand. In other words, saying to liberation movements, you cannot set up bases in our country. While on the other hand, focusing on a peaceful resolution in terms of political problems in the region, and therefore accepting political refugees who may be from those liberation movements. And so I think that we'll continue to see a continuation of that kind of cautious approach to diplomacy, at least in the public sphere. Under this particular administration, in huge contrast to the previous administration, we've seen a close relationship being formed between this current president in Botswana, President Masisi, and President Mnangagwa. President Mnangagwa attended the inauguration of this president a few years ago, and this was in complete contrast to our previous president, President Khama, whom, as you know, had very little love lost. There was very little love lost between him and former President Mugabe in terms of him speaking out about issues. Our former president was criticized for using rooftop diplomacy by some, not necessarily because they didn't agree with what he was saying, but as I say, because we're a small country, landlocked, we've constantly had to try and walk that tightrope in terms of safeguarding ourselves. So what do I expect? In terms of President Masisi, I suspect that he will continue to be cautious. I was quite disappointed, though, in the statement which came out of SADC, where President Mnangagwa, at the handing over of the chairpersonship from Zimbabwe to Botswana, was praised for outstanding leadership. This was on the 7th of August. And juxtaposing that against the picture which has been painted by Professor Moyo, one can understand the frustration and deep disappointment which our citizens in the region have towards the absolute idea of SADC getting involved in objective mediation. And I understand the concerns. What we can do in the area of solidarity, building human rights defenders networks, really building upon the amazing work which the Southern Africa Human Rights Defenders Network has already started. Statements to which Tiseke made reference, which have been coming out about Zimbabwe. And I'd like to say this activism did not start in South Africa and then spread to the region. It's been in the region in different ways. But we're all working much more closely together. And thanks to COVID-19, that's the one positive thing of COVID. We haven't sat and written proposals to donors, first have a workshop and to agree on the venue and to agree on the budget. We're able to engage and be involved in solidarity action. Using parliamentarians, the leader of the opposition in Botswana recently delivered an amazingly strongly worded statement on the 10th of August this year in Parliament, calling upon the Botswana government to speak. He said that we are appalled by the silence of our own government, referring to the Botswana government, which has decided to bury its head in the proverbial sand by adopting a see no evil, hear no evil posture. By saying nothing, the government of Botswana is actually complicit in the atrocities we are witnessing. So we're beginning to see politicians also becoming part of this broad network of solidarity. So I see a lot of opportunities for engagement. And I think that to build a strong regional solidarity network, it needs to be rooted in strong national activism. And civil society organizations, and broadly speaking, including the church, the media, trade unions, youth, women's movements, can really continue working together. In Botswana, we started doing a bit of that work in 2006 and have a group called Bokiskos, which is the Botswana Civil Society Solidarity Coalition for Zimbabwe. And we've constantly focused on raising awareness about the issues which are occurring in Zimbabwe, because the Botswana saying is matlo khoshama babi. When my neighbor's house is on fire, my house is on fire. We cannot isolate this as a Zimbabwean issue. if there's a crisis in Zimbabwe, there's a crisis in the region, and it requires regional response.
Definitely.
Thank you.
And we've seen how many Zimbabweans have, fled to neighboring countries in Botswana and South Africa, especially. So definitely the region has to get involved. And before I move on to Namatai, so what about any advice that you can give to activists on the ground in Zimbabwe?
I think one of the challenges we had in the region when the GNU was created, we struggled to work out how we could be of assistance. It's really important that the potential for effective solidarity is based on a mandate which we're given by colleagues inside the country. We can all come up with all sorts of theoretical ideas about what may work, what may not, but mandate-based activism is incredibly important. And the colleagues inside Zimbabwe need to reflect on how best we can amplify, we can support, we can assist their work inside the country.
Right. No, thank you very much, Alice, and we'll come back to you. And I know there are quite a lot of people who are sending me messages on WhatsApp saying that they're failing to join the Zoom call. Unfortunately, we have reached our maximum number, but those who would like to follow the discussion, we're also live streaming on Facebook. So please go to the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition Facebook page, and you'll be able to follow the discussion there. Now, Namatai, are you back online? Can we unmute Namatai, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, finally we can.
Okay, great, awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm actually quite happy that I was not the next person to speak after Prof, because some of the submissions that have been good. All right, can you hear me?
Your line is really breaking. Can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Now
I can hear you, yes.
Maybe switch
Okay,
off the video. Switch off the video so that we can just, maybe it will be better. Just switch off the video and then let's try just the audio. Maybe that will work. Okay. We will continue to try and get Namatai. As you can all see, she's having problems with the internet there. But I would also like to ask those who would like to contribute to start, to raise their hands, from the virtual floor. I know that quite a few people, like Professor David Moore, sent me a message saying that he would also like to talk. Professor Moore, if you are there and you want to tell us what you want to say, we can bring you in now. Is Professor Moore there? Professor David Moore?
Hello.
Hello, Professor. Yes, you can come in.
Thank you. I think this was a question somebody else started to raise about Professor Jonathan. I'm always a bit surprised to see Professor Moyo on civil society sites, because in the not so past, perhaps civil society might have been subjected to considerable repression by a regime in which Professor Moyo had quite a long role. So perhaps just to clarify historical questions and biographical questions, I think it would be interesting if Jonathan would perhaps just tell us where he's been since the mid-1970s, when he was in the camps in Tanzania and left, and I don't know, went to the United States, got a degree. I've read your PhD. It's pretty boring, Jonathan, not like your life after that. I just think everybody would really like to know your own career so we can kind of figure out where you stand now. And I probably agree with you that the G40 name, moniker, is probably a bit too simplistic. but still there was, I mean, why work so closely with Grace Mugabe for so long? What was the sort of thinking going on there? And that, of course, ignores the issues of what happened in Kenya, what happened at Wits University. All of these cloud your reputation. So I think if you're trying to, make it clear just what your motivations are now, it would be really nice to have a good historical view. I think someone raised this issue in a SAPE's meeting, and you kind of brushed them off by saying your young brother, Alex Magaisa, could answer the last questions. And so you didn't answer that question, which somebody else raised. But the question won't disappear. It's not just me asking it. Everybody wants to know. People are very polite. They are Zimbabweans. I'm not a Zimbabwean. I don't have to be polite, but I've, studied a lot of Zimbabwe, and I know a lot of people there, and they would like to know your career. Could you just illustrate that a bit? I don't want to make ad hominem arguments, but I think this is a question a lot of people would know. Thanks.
I'm sure Professor Moyo will come in and respond to that, but may I also appeal to people so that we stick to the topic, and because we want to keep it to the so what questions, what can we do, what is the way forward? Let's make this discussion about the solutions. And so anyone who would like to contribute, please can we focus on that? Professor Moyo, so much has been asked, from people and even in the chat room. Would you like to come in and respond to Professor David Moore, and also maybe respond to Alice about the UN issue, the Kagame element, and also there's some people who are asking, the UN will not do anything about this, especially when there's the China and Russia element in it. Professor Moyo, can you come in? And if there's anyone else who would like to contribute from the floor, please raise your hands and we'll be able to come to you. Professor Moyo, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much, Violet. It's, of course, always interesting that when there's a public discussion on Zimbabwe and some of us participate, the focus shifts from the issue to the person. I would like to appeal to you or to Crisis Coalition to one day when your facilities allow, create an opportunity that would be about some of us explaining our personal circumstances. I think that it would be definitely, much as I'm interested, I would love to engage in that, but it would be useless, in my view, to deal with the question that David is asking me to explain or talk about myself and my career, going back to my student days, or even my days in Tanzania, at Mgagao, Kenya, South Africa. I think this is a disservice to the topic and the situation that we are talking about in Zimbabwe, much as I'm very happy to deal with that. But I would like to make one thing clear. Anyone who thinks that there are some people who should talk about the situation in Zimbabwe and others who should not talk about the situation, I think creates a problem, because there are various interests in Zimbabwe, and in my view, all of them are legitimate. Hello, Violet?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, because I'm hearing other people.
Can we mute everyone else and just have the person who's currently speaking, we have the mic on. Can we unmute everyone else? Can we mute everyone else, please? Professor Moyo, you can continue.
Okay, thank you. I think that if you are going to have an informed dialogue, you have to enable all voices to come to the table. I'm having interruptions on my side.
I think we are getting some interruptions, but you can continue, Professor.
Okay. So I think that,
hold on, please. Blessing, can we remove the people?
Yeah, I Violet. Yeah, Prof can continue. Prof, you can continue.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Violet.
Yeah, you can continue, Prof.
Violet, you're on mute. Violet, you're on mute.
Professor Moyo, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I think the really talking point raised by Alice is whether the United Nations is the appropriate forum to deal with the situation in Zimbabwe. The background to this is that the crisis in Zimbabwe has gone on for far too long. And Zimbabweans have lost faith not only in their national institutions, but also in the regional body, SADC, and the continental body, the African Union, in general. But with respect to the current situation, it is a fact that SADC embraced the coup. SADC supported the African Union through the current commission also supported the coup. That really is one reason why, for many Zimbabweans, they for legitimate reasons, do not trust the regional body and the continental body. So far, the intervention that has made a difference has come from fact-finding missions seconded by the United Nations, mainly through the Human Rights Commission. If focusing on the United Nations on the back of the principle of the responsibility to protect JOLTS, South Africa, JOLTS, SADC, or the African Union, then perhaps some good would have come out of this. I don't think that people should be concerned about the background of certain interests in the UN who have the veto power, which I think seemed to be Alice's concern. Remember that even though the veto power was exercised by China and Russia in 2008, the fact that Zimbabwe was a Security Council concern or focus dramatically changed the situation in Zimbabwe. In fact, one of the reasons why there was some success in the mediation effort of the then President of South Africa, Mbeki, who was the SADC facilitator. It was precisely because of the fact that Zimbabwe became an issue at the United Nations. I am very sure that we might see quite some progress in terms of moving the situation forward, if not quite the same or similar process. An acknowledgement that sometimes it is better to exercise the responsibility to protect before disaster strikes.
Okay.
I think as the situation in Zimbabwe shows that the population is helpless. It is a battered population with no clear national resolution, no clear regional resolution, and no clear continental resolution. And that necessitates multilateral intervention at the UN level.
Okay, so let me try. Thank you, Professor. Let me try and see if we can get Namatai back, and then we can take a call from Sid. Namatai.
Okay, I'm going to try without my video on. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, awesome. So yeah, great deliberations, and I'm happy that the likes of Tiseke and Alice had spoken before me. I think I'm going to speak mostly about the possibilities that exist with young people and the youth movement, and why we need to restore, number one, the faith, and number two, we need to have a clear purpose so that when people come together, they know what they're coming together for. And there is a very strong resolution as to what can be done. I liked in the presentation that Prof made when he said that the citizens of this country are also key in this narrative. They are a key component of this narrative. That was a very powerful thing to say. But in Zimbabwe, we have to be cognizant of who constitutes the majority of citizens. It's the young people, it's the youth. So you have about 70% of the population of Zimbabwe being under the age of 55, approximately. To mention the young people in the diaspora, you've got young people in South Africa, you've got young people in Botswana, you've got young people in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia. This is a whole network, a whole constituency of young people, and they are key players in whatever change is going to happen in our country. So that was my first contribution. So the first question was, what can we expect from the international community? And the question was inferring to SADC, AU, and South Africa. I personally feel that our focus must not be in the conventional formal institutions, but it must be in tapping the broader youth movements in the region. I say this in particular reference to people like Julius Malema and the EFF. They have actually become a strong voice of young people in the region that are affirming what is actually happening. Young people in Zimbabwe is wrong, and they are so outspoken that they would be willing, to actually help out. So I think they present a great possibility of actually helping out to ensure that the struggle in Zimbabwe is won and it is fought. It is now a question of how can young people locally tap into the young people around the region and the movements that are existing, not necessarily focusing on institutions such as SADC and institutions such as the AU, because in all honesty, they have a track record of literally not doing much in the context of addressing the issues that are happening. So that's a possibility that's there. The next issue that I wanted to talk about was of having a clear purpose. I think one of the things that is causing confusion with CSOs and is also causing confusion amongst activists is the lack of a unified purpose. And I think that the regime does a great job preying on this. We have to come to a point where we agree as activists, as civil society organization, what is our focus, what is our focus? Are we regime change? If that is the direction we're going, We need to say, are we pro-engagement? Are we pro-dialogue? That's the agenda that we're running. The problem, because we do not have clear orientation and a clear purpose. You have a situation where people are using engagement strategies, but they are saying that they are for. You have people that are using regime change strategies, and they're saying that they are for engagement. So as long as we don't have the clarity and purpose, what is the thing that we want? Why are we doing this? It becomes very difficult to mobilize people around any particular rallying point. And that's why we've got pockets of citizens showing up to do all kinds of things that people are not actually uniting and working together. Now, the next question was on the aspect, what can youth do? I think the first thing that we have to really look into is how do we restore the faith and the belief that grassroots activism and youth activism works and it yields results. I think because of the experiences people have had under the Mugabe regime, you have a sentiment that people have lost faith, they have lost the belief. They'll tell you things like, oh, we've been doing this for the past 20 years or for the past 30 years. It's not going to happen. The change you want is not going to come. So much so that in my personal experience with even older civic space leaders, they would tell me things like, you will get tired because we were so young and so energetic. Because these people have stopped believing. And you see this, manifesting itself all the way to grassroots. Now, I had to ask myself, why is it people have stopped believing it works? So the first thing I wanted to say is that when Alice was talking about strengthening the human rights center, I think something very powerful and profound. We need to support youth. There are older traditional CSOs that have the resources and the capabilities. But as a young activist, I can say that sometimes we don't actually get that, particularly if you are the unknown activist. So you might be a bit more privileged when you are a bit known and you show up you trend on social media, or you're known on television or on the news. But for the rest of the unknown activists, it's a whole different scenario. And this actually limits participation in people stop showing up. And the other issue is on how youth do not support youth. I think one of the problems that we're facing is we now have more politicians amongst youth than we have activists. We see this in the context that I can actually share my personal experience, that as a young activist who has refused to politically align myself to any one particular party, you now have youth in ZANU-PF to deal with. I also have had experiences with youth and opposition to deal with. I also have youth and civil society to deal with.
Hello, Namatai. It's unfortunate that Namatai's connection is really bad, so she's coming in and out, and so we're losing some of her submissions. But I'm sure you all got a gist of what she's trying to say. And just also reading comments from the chat, Rufus says the reality is that the youth are not too active in politics. They focus on hustling for life. When it's voting, the youth are not patient to be in queues for hours. The voiceless is the rural community. None consider them vital, but they are very vital. In politics, being active on social media must translate to active or to being active on the ground. So thank you for that. Let me take a couple of calls from the Zoom chat. Let's start with Sid. Sid?
Hi, Violet. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. I think one of the critical things that we need to look at as a nation is how the state has configured itself, and in terms of the government, state, and party conflation, which has not only disengaged the people, but which has also brought in a lot of questions around power transfer. The bigger question as well, which is a fundamental root that Zimbabweans, especially those who have been pushing for the democratization of the nation, has suffered along the way, has been to heavily depend on the donor community for our fortunes, but also there has been limited civic participation due to poor civic education. If we go back to the years of 1987 going into 1999, you could see that there was a huge investment in civic education. The organizations that were participating then were really concerned around community transformation and participation. But what also then had to happen was that this whole body politic found itself captured by the commercialization of the struggle, but also the commercialization extended into the aid routes that civic societies have been using. Hence, at the end of the day, we find ourselves still questioning who is the best driver of what agenda. So if Prof. Moyo speaks to the language of civil society, we'll always question like what Prof. Moyo did to say, what is your agenda? What is your motivation? So it remains the question of how do we build trust around the national question? How do we evolve around a common goal, which then brings Zimbabwe to a negotiating space where we agree to say, how do we come up with a common influence on a specific agenda that the nation wants? Take example, the Matebelele collective fiasco, where no one doubts about Gukurawundi crisis. No one doubts who was responsible for Gukurawundi. But when it comes to solutions, we found that the civil society in the Matebelele and Midlands region, they had to split given who then sponsors whose agenda. But at the end of the day, it is the community that are critical in terms of the stability, is the community that are supposed to be the drivers. So I want to believe that for as long as we find the nation in the economic doldrums that it is right now, it will be very difficult for people to choose democratization against livelihood. And I want to believe that as we move forward as a nation, we need now to draw the line in the sand of saying, how do we build the capacity of our communities vis-a-vis the democratization agenda, but also how do we push for the government to begin to respond to the emancipation of the people and also empowering of communities, empowering of the young people, empowering of women, because then that economic independence of young people and women would also give an independent voice in terms of their choices electorally or any other means that we think that we need to do. So strong institutions have to be built, supported by well-articulated and well-informed individuals. Thank you, Violet.
Thank you, Sydney. Let me try Namatai again, because you just sent a message to say, please, can you allow me to...
All right. There's an echo.
Hello, Namatai.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, but can you specifically respond to a particular issue that was raised by Sydney about how do we build trust? You know, this is a serious issue now in Zimbabwe, and the issue of also polarization. It would appear that we are a nation that is extremely divided in everything. How does one begin to address this dysfunction? Briefly. Okay, so Namatai, unfortunately, we've lost her again. Tiseke, are you able to come in and help us with this question briefly on the issue of trust and polarization and how we can deal with the issue of trying to fix a divided nation? Because many are saying that Zimbabwe is now a broken society. So if we can't fix that, then how can we move on and try to fix all these other problems? What can you say about this, Tiseke?
Thank you very much, Violet. Look, I understand how the country can be viewed as a broken society where there's little trust, but I would like to see it from a more positive outlook. I would like to present a more positive outlook. I do think that one of the key challenges with the crisis in Zimbabwe, especially in recent years, has been more about perception. So perception about whose side certain parts of society are on. So civil society and perceived divisions within civil society in terms of support for various factions of the NDC or various factions of ZANU-PF. And so that politicization has definitely played a role in the kind of mistrust and divisions that we see. But at the same time, my sense is that there's a general recognition in Zimbabwe that there are a lot of issues that are common to the various institutions and various parts of the citizenry. And when we talk about the economic crisis, it's affecting everyone. It is always sad for me to see the brutality of the police in Zimbabwe, even as you see the poverty that they're wallowing in. So in my opinion, I think it's a matter of coming together in solidarity around the very common issues that the country is facing. And stepping away from the isolation that we have seen in the past, where it's been various actors, whether it's the trade unions coming out in protest, whether it's the doctors and nurses protesting, or the church speaking out. There is a need for a more unified voice because the issues are certainly common.
Okay, thank you, Tiseke. Let me take another contribution from the floor. Engineer K. Maeka, briefly, what do you have to say?
Okay, thank you, Violet. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So actually I have two questions and they're related to what is going to be the way forward now. My first question goes to what Professor Moyo says. He says the UN has the experience and the capacity to intervene. And then my question there is Mnangagwa forced to accept this type of intervention? Probably by way of affiliation, his affiliation or Zimbabwe's affiliation to the UN, is he forced to accept that kind of intervention if it should so come? And the background to that question is because of the recent intervention by Ramaphosa. He sent envoys and he rebuffed them. So the question is he forced, probably according to diplomacy, is he forced to accept any kind of help if it comes? And then the second point is, which I actually agree with, Tiseke, my sister, says the UN cannot intervene according to the set scenarios, right, that dictate when it can. And I agree with that. So she goes on to say activism can help, but then again, the reality is, according to what Professor Moyo said, which is the reality on the ground, the state is now being done by the military, right? And then according to the pyramid of powers, the citizenry is holding on to the last string of power. And that part actually includes those people who are involved in activism. And bear in mind that this government is completely devoid of embarrassment. Any form of bad publicity or anything, they're not afraid of that, any form of bad publicity. So how do you reconcile that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Engineer. And before we go to Ndumiso Sikoza, I'd like to read a contribution from Facebook from Dr. Filani Zamchia. He says, thanks for the analysis, Jonathan Moyo. I always love it when you put your political science hat on like today. Will an international-led transitional process not be a protracted one, given the urgency of the matter to an ordinary suffering Zimbabwean, and given the lack of consensus on Zimbabwe in the UN Security Council? Why not an indigenous transitional process with support from, but not led by, the international community to deal with the military dimension? So that's for you, Professor Moyo. Just write those down, and then I will come back and get the way forward from all the speakers. Let me get two more from the chat. Who's next? Ndumiso Sikoza. Ndumiso? Okay, so Ndumiso is no longer there. What about Lifted? Can we unmute Lifted?
Hello, Violet.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You can go ahead. Briefly, please.
Yes. Violet, I would like to agree with some of the contribution that the Professor Jonathan Moyo made. I would say the military is indeed a problem. And indeed, SADC, South Africa, and African Union, they cannot successfully intervene in Zimbabwean crisis because they do have some interest in Zimbabwe. And generally, Zimbabweans do not trust South Africa. Remember the scenario we had of former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, in declaring that the Zimbabweans election were free and fair sometime back in the early 2000s. And then we heard the Democratic Alliance going to court to force the president Thabo Mbeki to review the Kampepe and Masoneke report. And it was unfortunate that the report say that the elections were not free and fair. So judging from that history, Zimbabwean cannot trust the South African government to successfully intervene on the Zimbabwean situation. And recently the ANC came out and called ZANU-PF a sister party. And that already displays bias on their part before they have even started intervening. And then there is one thing that the professor did not address, and I put a question that the political parties in Zimbabwe, which were the faction element, that the MDCA seek to discredit the MDCT discrediting MDCA. We've got G40, we've got Lacoste, all of them, they are fighting for relevance. So in the situation whereby there is intervention, all of them will be seeking to discredit one faction or the other so that they be counted as relevant. So we see a situation of exclusion coming up. And then, as you just said now, there's a lack of consensus among Zimbabwean citizens, which is a very big hindrance in the situation that there is an intervention. There is no consensus. Zimbabweans themselves do not seem to agree on the way forward, as shown by the Cold War between the diasporans and the Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe. So, because this comes from the ZANU-PF regime divide and rule tactic. Right? It was overplayed, and intimidation and fear-mongering set in to the extent that the citizens do not, they are not united, and ZANU-PF is maximizing on divide and rule strategy.
Okay.
So hence the lack of social contract. There's no social contract.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So let me go to the panelists, and I'll start with Professor Moyo, your reaction, and also can you just summarize that into a way forward as part of your final words, because we're also running out of time. Professor Moyo.
Can
you have to unmute?
Unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes. Just thank you, Violet. Very brief. Three issues. The first one was whether Mnangagwa would be forced to accept a mediation, UN mediation. And I think really the issue in the end is whether initially will he accept a fact-finding mission from the United Nations. When they rejected the envoys and treated them as a bilateral issue, they suggested that they would respond differently in the face of a multilateral engagement. It could be SADC, it could be African Union. But in this case, I think there has to be a process, and the best way forward is to have a fact-finding mission. And we have reason to believe them when they say they have nothing to hide. They have presented a completely different narrative against the evidence on abductions, torture, and so forth. The only way to settle that issue is a fact-finding mission, and the UN should be in a position to bring that. But I understand from Philani that there seems to be a debate and interest to have an indigenous process. And he says if that indigenous process is supported by the international community, all the better. But our experience, even from the contributions that have been made, is that it is practically impossible for Zimbabweans to agree on an indigenous process. This is one area where, because of our history, because of the nature of the polarization and the depth of that polarization, Zimbabweans have not been able to speak with one voice. However, in my presentation and in my view, we must always be guided by the basics of the crisis in terms of who are the quarreling parties and what they are quarreling over. It cannot be a free-for-all. This idea that we should invite everyone in civil society, the churches, and so forth to the table is unreasonable, unprecedented, and with no example anywhere in the world. In this particular case, my presentation is that the quarrel is between, in the first instance, Nelson Chamisa versus Mnangagwa, because the ZDF, the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, stole the election from Nelson Chamisa in favor of Mnangagwa. And this has given rise to this crisis. And secondly, and as we have seen this year, the crisis arises out of the fact that the courts, as in the Chamisa case, working with Mnangagwa and the parliament, have stolen MPs from the MDC alliance. And these people who are victimized by that are the voters. It's an attack on the right to vote. But the institutional representation of that vote is in the MDCA, and therefore there is a need to resolve a conflict between, on the one hand, Nelson Chamisa and the MDCA, and on the other hand, ZDF, ZANU-PF, and Mnangagwa. It cannot be a free-for-all. I believe civil society has the responsibility and obligation to support the voters, to ensure that the right to vote, which is enshrined in the Constitution, counts. That's the key thing. Now, when my colleague Philani says, let's support the indigenous process, I presume he means there's a debate in favor of a national transitional authority and would like the international community or even regional and continental community to support that effort. My concern about that is every time or any time you undermine the consent aspect of any political process by bringing a structure such as the NTA, you guarantee that the political community will not support it. And there is no reason why the political community should support a structure that is devoid of representation, which has been one of the problems with the NTA. And in fact, this also addresses the last question, Violet. The last intervention was that I did not deal with political parties and so forth. Basically, I think it is important for us to move away from this idea that whenever there is a crisis in the country, it is everyone's crisis. Everyone is a protagonist. Everyone must be part of the solution. It is important to respect the fact that there is a constitution in Zimbabwe that was overthrown by the military, that constitution needs to be restored. It is important to acknowledge that on the basis of that constitution, an election was held, and the participants in that election that came out and who are now in some kind of a conflict are ZANU-PF, ZDF, and Mnangagwa, Nelson Chamisa, and the MDCA alliance, and that everyone else falls in either of these. You are either supporting Nelson Chamisa and the MDCA, or you are supporting Mnangagwa, ZDF, and ZANU-PF. And if we can focus like that and be guided by that, I think we will make a progress. And that was really the essence of my intervention.
Okay,
Thank you.
And the very last thing from you, Prof, before I go to Alice and get to final words. Batsirai Ngube on Facebook says, I have a question for Professor Moyo. Given China's role as a ZANU-PF military benefactors and protectors, what should be the strategy to engage the Chinese as part of the process of familiarizing Zimbabwean politics? Can you be brief on that one, please? Because we're running out of time. Thanks.
Well, I think one of the reasons why there is the suggestion that perhaps we need a UN fact-finding mission to look at the situation in Zimbabwe and use that as a basis for coming up with a way forward, is to try and create a common position for the international community. But as far as I'm concerned, it's less about what China thinks or any other external party thinks, and more about respecting the will of the people of Zimbabwe. And we need to settle the question as to what the will of the people of Zimbabwe is in terms of the 2018 election, and with regard to the presidential election, and in terms of the unprecedented attack on the rights of the voter with respect to what has happened in Parliament. What has happened in Parliament has nothing to do with China, America, or any other power. It is unprecedented. It is shocking that the people of Zimbabwe, where the incumbent whose legitimacy is in question, to undo a vote outside the processes that are there to review an election. If what has happened in Parliament is allowed to stand, that a loser who contested under a completely different party is allowed to come into Parliament by taking away the people's vote for a particular party. If that is allowed, this precedent is exactly the sort of precedent that can lead to a much more serious conflict in the country, which has never been seen before. That is the fundamental issue in Zimbabwe, as far as I'm concerned. And that is why I think that it is important to have a fact-finding, at least multilateral process in order to address this basic issue. You cannot attack the right to vote. Okay. You cannot use subterfuge or any other institution to undo the people's will and expect that everything will be okay. For Toko Kope to come back to Parliament when everybody knows that she lost and did not even contest for Parliament is outrageous and unprecedented and totally unacceptable.
Thank you, Professor. Now let me get Alice. Alice, your final thoughts.
Thank you. I had another question for Professor, because he was saying, how can people allow an incumbent to behave this way? What is the solution? But anyway, there's no room for responses. Just 3 really quick points. First of all, I think there is room for ensuring that you've already had special rapporteurs from the UN. Yeah, country visits, missions to Zimbabwe, produced reports. The most recent one was last year, the Special Rapporteur on Peaceful Assembly. who is not the favorite person of the government of Zimbabwe at the moment. But there are ways of gathering information to contribute to the strategy which can be used to rectify what is happening in Zimbabwe. Secondly, I'm not completely convinced that all SADC states accept that there's a crisis in Zimbabwe. Only in February this year, Botswana effectively forcibly repatriated Zimbabweans. Started last year and continued this year. And our justice minister said he does not recognize Zimbabwean nationals in the refugee camp as political refugees. And we saw a repeat of that, well, what happened before in relation to Namibians from the Caprivi region. They were also forcibly repatriated. So we've got to locate the behavior of states within the broader regional interests which they may have, and in terms of the kind of diplomacy which is utilized. Last point. I spoke about how once the GNU came into place, there was this silence for us, for those of us on the outside, not knowing how best to offer solidarity. I completely agree with Namatai and with Sid, talking about the need for commonality in terms of a goal. That is critically important for effective regional solidarity. We need to have mandate-based activism and solidarity. And so the sooner colleagues can decide what their common position is, we talked about whether it's regime change, whether it's dialogue, it makes it much easier and more effective for us to assist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice. Let's try Namatai again. Namatai, your final thoughts?
All right. Yeah, I think the most important thing is just to reiterate that young people are very central and very key to all of the processes that are happening. And we need just to strengthen how we support young people so that they are not afraid to show up in their numbers. So this support must be at grassroots. It must go to the unknown activist. It must go to the activist who does not have a political party or an organization that they actually belong to. We have to have methods of being able to trace and to track how these activists are doing, as this could actually increase the number of people who participate. I can actually say from being an activist on the ground, one of the biggest feeling, who will come for me, who will follow through for me. So I think that there has been a very strong politicization of how solidarity is given, and we must come to a point where we as young people are able to give solidarity based upon causes, not based upon who has what political party and who does not. And then maybe just the final thing that I wanted to say is that we need to also enhance aspects of security training. We need to enhance aspects of follow-up mechanisms, post-arrest, post-abductions. We need to be able to follow up on people, because the people that are arrested and abducted and we don't follow up on them are the people who would tell other people that don't do it because it will mess up your life and people don't care. So when we strengthen ourselves at that level and people know that people care, people follow up, it could actually result in more young people showing up to participate and putting themselves in harm's way to see things work out. And then maybe as the final thing is just to say that we need more activists more than we need politicians. I have seen young people refuse to give support or solidarity to other young people because they think that maybe this other young person is stealing my shine, or maybe they have more they're building up political capital to assume a higher political position. And that falls on our generation so that we are able to listen to each other and we are able to give solidarity to each other, not based upon the politics of who gets what, but based upon the causes that we find are very common amongst us. So I think those would be my sentiments. Focus on the grassroots activism, focus on giving support on the ground, and definitely more people will start showing up because they know that people care and people will definitely follow up.
You're raising some very important issues there, Namatai, and I wish we'd had more time with you, but unfortunately because of the connection problems we didn't. But there's one other issue that you raised that I think is important to also highlight, and this is on the issue of solidarity. I've seen quite a lot of people saying if they're on their own, like ordinary people who are afraid to participate or be vocal because they feel that because they are not known, they're not going to participate that much, because if they're arrested, they're on their own. They are not known like all the other, high profile cases that we have seen. So what can you say about that, and how can these people be encouraged to participate more and know that if something happens to them, they will get support from the right channels, even from civil society in Zimbabwe? Namatai? Oh, and we've lost her again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I think that maybe what I can just say is with the resonance that we have to come to a point where we appreciate that no one is, is crazy. For me, what people were calling bravery was actually naivety, because I was not cognizant of the dangers that way. Now that I'm cognizant of the dangers that way, for me to show up again powerfully, I'm dependent upon the faith that the community will come for me and the community will help me. And a lot of people are petrified of participating because they do not have that surety and that faith in community, in the fact that others will come for me and they will help me. I have seen this happen to a lot of people, and this is why a lot of people end up not showing up. Then I just wanted to make a remark about a comment I just saw in the group on the issue of cash activism, whatever. I think that the regime is extremely excellent at peddling narratives. And we are not showing solidarity to people thinking that they got money to do what they are doing. And yet some of these people are very genuine. So I would actually want to say that we need to come to a position where we have to critically analyze some of these issues and to test them, to say, if you're calling this one a cash activist, give us proof, give us the receipts. Because I have seen that a lot of people have suffered because people assume that they're getting so much in the way of money and in the way of things. My question is, aren't there any genuine people? Because every other activist who has participated in a very impactful way has been called a cash activist, have been called they're getting this from this one. So we need to change those narratives. And we also need to change the idea of narrative peddling, both from opposition and also from the ruling party. You will hear someone in the opposition saying Ningi activist is being sponsored by the ruling party, and the ruling party is saying you're being sponsored by the opposition. It's fine to have your political affiliations as an activist, but we have to be in a position where we ask ourselves, whenever narratives are being derived, let them have evidence. We need to test all of those theories. We need you to produce the evidence that this person is getting this from that. But the most important thing is to come to a point whereby we do not stop showing solidarity based upon rumors, based upon narratives, because sometimes we're doing that to people who are actually genuine. And at the end of the day, we are shooting ourselves in the foot, and those people are gone. You will never see them show up. We will turn them, and they are the people who will go back to the community and say, listen, don't do this because it's going to ruin your life.
Okay, no, thank you very much, the Namatai. And Tiseke, your final words.
Very quickly, and actually I really would have liked, and I hope there will be room for further debate with the professor, because I fundamentally disagree with his position that this is just about the political elite. And I would argue that it is for that very reason that we find ourselves in this position. This idea of political elite entrenchment across the region is why, and the exclusion of the majority of citizens in the narrative of how government is run, is why we find ourselves exactly here. But I won't belabor that point because we don't have time. I'll just conclude to say that what is needed in Zimbabwe, like many other countries in our region, is an inclusive social, political, and economic reform process that, as Pilani Zamchia said, is homegrown and supported by the region and international actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tiseke. And I'm sorry to say we won't be able to take, the contributions from all those people who've raised their hands. We have just run out of time. But I would like to thank everyone. I'd like to hand over the discussion to Blessing Vava from the Crisis Zimbabwe Coalition to give us the way forward and closing remarks. But before he does come in, I want to just thank all of you for watching and participating in this special Zimbabwe Dialogue Series, which has been brought to you by the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition. Blessing.
Hi, comrades. Thank you very much, Violet, for handling this meeting very well. And I want also to thank, to extend my gratitude to the panelists. I think that they did justice to the topic, quite incisive inputs that will make us, to think deeper as we try to find solutions to our crisis that is bedeviling our country. I think the takeaways for me, I think firstly, there is a need, one thing that was read, that there's a need for solidarity among the common issues, that we have to identify the common issues that are affecting the people of Zimbabwe. And also that we need to unite because the power is in the people. Yes, the elites can meet. Yes, the elites can agree. We have seen the GNU, the Global Political Agreement, where we allowed the politicians, to decide our fate, where we allowed the politicians to agree to write a constitution for us, we allow the politician to determine the course of the country. And what we are paying for, it is the homework or the unfinished business of the Global Political Agreement. So and also the one thing that was also raised about the need for indigenous processes, to continue. Yes, there can be mediation processes, but also people must be able to do work on the ground, which is quite commendable, and the activists must not rest. They must keep on, pressing the buttons. And also one thing that came out was that there's a need for a fact-finding mission. I think that that fact-finding mission, as some have raised, that the UN must send a fact-finding mission, but also now that, South Africa, through President, the envoy that was appointed by President Ramaphosa, there is need for also an envoy from the SADC region, to come on a fact-finding mission, also to feed in the processes in that regard. And also one other key issue was that there has to be an inclusive, socio-economic process that involves all facets of our society, that involves all corners of society, the labor, the trade unions, that we can't just leave it to politicians. Yes, Professor Moyo raises an issue that it is, a battle now between Emmerson Mnangagwa and Nelson Chamisa and ZANU-PF and the MDC Alliance. But Zimbabwe is bigger than that. Zimbabwe is bigger than individuals, and Zimbabwe is bigger than political parties. And as such, it is now the time for Zimbabweans to come together. It's now time for Zimbabweans to find a solution, to confront the elephant in the room. And it's now time for Zimbabwe to find the solution that is bedeviling our country. In that regard, I wish to extend my gratitude also to the people that spared their time, to participate in this very important dialogue. Us as the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition and our partners, Violet Gonda, you are going to have more of these, discussions going forward, and also to highlight and also to inform that this will be a monthly event, and also going to have a hot seat. So the hot seat with Violet Gonda is going to come back, courtesy of the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition, in partnership with Violet Gonda. So much to look forward to, so much to deliberate on, so much for us to strategize, and so much for us to sharpen our tools, so much for us to sharpen our arms, so much for us to sharpen our ideas as we forge and as we try to find a solution that is affecting our country. And on behalf of the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition, I wish to thank everyone that have spared their time to participate in this Zimabwe Dialogue Series, which is going to come monthly, courtesy of the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition. I wish you well and have a good night.